Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Compass, here live on Quotidiano TV in Bucharest. Professor Friedland, welcome to my talk show. How are you? Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Professor Friedland. You're a professor for neurology at the UL School of Medicine, and you are a neurologist practicing now for almost 3 centuries, if I'm not mistaken. Please tell us something about what inspired you about 10 years ago to write a paper. Why do human beings produce antibodies against the Tobacco Mosaic Virus?
Yes, thank you. Molecular mimicry is a very powerful mechanism for disease. We are exposed to lots of potentially pathogenic or potentially foreign proteins, and the opportunity to make an immune response to them, which can cause disease through homology developing because of evolutionary conservation or just by chance, is great. And the best example of that is rheumatic heart disease, where a streptococcal infection in the throat makes an antibody response, and the antibodies to the streptococcus just happen to attack the heart valves because the protein on the heart valves are linked or is similar to the protein in the bacteria. And you can look for this by doing a blast search, which compares all the known proteins in the world with a sequence of amino acids that you give them. And we did that and found that there are interesting homologies with Tobacco Mosaic Virus to neuronal proteins. And this could be a mechanism of disease. So exposure to the virus could cause an immune response. And one we were considering was myasthenia gravis. But also, it is known that smoking is protective against Alzheimer's disease, which doesn't mean people should smoke. Of course, that's never advisable. But people who smoke have a lower risk of getting Parkinson's. And there are more than 20 papers that show this is true. And it's a rather significant or powerful influence. And the reason has been debated. And we thought perhaps the reason could be that smokers get more exposure to tobacco mosaic virus.
Mm-hmm. And one should point out the fact that your article was the first report of the presence of anti-tobacco mosaic virus antibodies in human serum. And you, as you said, you also reported an association between the tobacco smoking and the anti-TMV antibodies.
Yes.
Yeah, tobacco smoking is obviously not healthy, but how could we explain this very sophisticated mechanism of our immunity? Why the contact with the tobacco mosaic virus might protect human beings against Alzheimer or Parkinson?
Well, there's no relation for Alzheimer. Smoking is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease.
Okay.
Oh, but it is for Parkinson's disease. And we had looked into the possibility there was some other evidence of molecular mimicry between the tobacco mosaic virus and neuronal proteins, including some that are linked to Alzheimer's disease. And we found this area was very hard to get funding for because it's off the main track. And I remember having a poster about this at a neurology meeting and watching my friends go by, and they were not stopping to see my work, our work. And I looked at one friend of mine who was very prominent and knowledgeable and intelligent, and I said, John, come on over. And he went like, okay. He read the title, which had plant viruses in the title, and he didn't want to know. He didn't want to, he just, what's he going to do with plant viruses? He's a neuroscientist. It was like I was talking about Martians, causing a disease. And the focus that many scientists have is very disturbing. Their focus is good, but you have to also have some awareness.
The surprising thing is that actually plant viruses are generally considered incapable of infecting humans. However, a few studies questioned actually the certainty of this paradigm, since the tobacco virus RNA has been detected in human samples, and the tobacco virus RNA translation has been described also in animal cells. In case of mice, for instance, their scientists could prove that this virus persisted 15 days after inoculation in their lungs, and that it was later detected in the macrophages of the bone marrow of mice. So obviously there is a certain interaction in addition to this mimicry which you were describing. But about which exposure could we talk? What sort of exposure to the tobacco mosaic virus may induce this immunity? Is it touching the tobacco? Is it smoking the tobacco? Which contact may induce or generate these antibodies against this virus?
That's a good question. And before we go any further, I should say that the TMV infects over 170 different kinds of plants. So I used to think, well, it's called tobacco mosaic virus, so it affects tobacco, but it infects a whole bunch of plants and a lot of plants that we eat. So if we touch an infected plant, we could get it internally by eating, or it's present on the surface of cigarettes. And we have to be careful. One thing, infection implies that the virus is multiplying, but it could be present in the body without multiplying if the exposure is enough. So research with cowpea mosaic virus says that mice fed the virus do not destroy the virus in the gut or in the blood. It just circulates through the body and it gets even into the brain. I'm not implying it causes any disease, but it is distributed widely, and the opportunity for that is present.
It's funny regarding the hygienic criteria on tobacco farms. I read that workers there are not supposed to smoke, that they should wash their hands as often as possible with soap, and that the disinfection is not working with alcohol. Mainly soap should be needed, and that they also either wear special coats or they must wash with strong detergents regularly their clothes. Since it's a very, very resistible virus, I read, and please correct me if I'm mistaken, that it's the most resistant virus. It can only be destroyed by heat. So if a plant is infected on a tobacco farm, then it must be carefully taken out in plastic bags and burned. So this hygienic criteria obviously highlight that this virus in its spread, which is only a mechanical spread, tobacco leaves needs a certain mechanical lesion in order to enter the cells. How could this tobacco mosaic virus enter the human being? By touching the cigarettes, by smoking, by holding the cigarette in the mouth? how could this context at the end of the day look like? And have then our body producing these antibodies against this virus?
Just by touching or entering the mouth, and making an antibody response to something which is not pathogenic is a mistake. But the immune system is not perfect. I think we learn things in school and we assume that all these things work perfectly, like, you know, DNA translation, transcription, and immune recognition of pathogen-related molecular patterns, and they work pretty well. I mean, both of us are still alive. We've survived, you know, for several decades, so they work pretty well, but they're not perfect. So that some people get peanut allergies, or allergies to certain kinds of clothes, or certain kinds of jewelry, or I'm allergic to cats. What's the point of that? You know, it's annoying. I like cats, but I can't be around cats, so that it shouldn't happen. There's no survival value for me to develop an allergy against cats. It's a mistake. So that developing an allergy against DMV would be not a good thing, but that it happens. And actually, I'm interested also in potato virus. The potato virus Y has a epitope in the virus's proteins, which is similar to the amyloid beta protein. And we have done research on that. And potato virus also affects a whole bunch of different plants. And it's estimated up to 5% of potato stocks in the United States are infected with potato virus.
So the potato is also a plant from the family of nightshades, like the tobacco plant, by the way.
Yes. So the theory here is that exposure to potato virus Y causes development of antibodies which bind to the amyloid beta protein because of molecular mimicry, and that leads to faster clearance from the blood. And we described animal evidence that supports this hypothesis about 10 years, I think in 2008, in the Journal of Neurochemistry.
Yeah. In this article, which we are talking about, why we produce antibodies against the Tobacco Mosaic Virus, there you describe a process of mimicry and explain that a certain sequence of the code protein of the Tobacco Mosaic Virus is, let's say, similar to a protein of the membranes of the mitochondrial membranes. Is that right? And because of this similarity,
yes,
we produce, our body might believe that it's one's own protein sequence, although it's a foreign one, and then it elicits this immune response. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
Particularly now, I don't know if you have noticed that during the pandemic, the first one was the French Institute Pasteur. They have observed that among the COVID patients, that the majority were not smokers. The non-smokers were less represented among the COVID patients, although a large part of the French population is smoking. Also, Professor Age Israel from Israel has observed a similar pattern, and Professor Louis Radu from London has also observed that patients of him, he has also published a paper on that, that those with either nicotine patches or that smokers presented less symptoms in case of COVID. Obviously, smoking is dangerous, no doubt about that. But do you think that this studies, or what had been observed during the pandemic, might be at a certain extent similar to what you have observed with these antibodies and its protection against Parkinson? Or is this a plain coincidence or something which still needs to be investigated?
Certainly it needs to be investigated, but I'm not familiar with any interaction between smoking and COVID. But it certainly would be something worth studying.
You've published recently a book called Unaging. Ladies and gentlemen, I kindly recommend you this book. It's a fascinating way how you present something, all of us, a phenomenon all of us are faced with. Please tell us something about this book, Professor, and which are the 4 factors which have an impact on how one ages.
Thank you very much. Perhaps I can illustrate this best if you think about what goals we have for aging. Everyone wants to survive. That's the first goal, not dying. Then we want to be free of disease. But I believe many people are satisfied with that. They think that's their idea. Well, okay, I want to be, okay, all right, I'm 60 years old. I've survived to be 60, and I don't have heart disease. I don't have cancer. So that's fine. That's enough for my health. But what we really need is a third goal, which is to be fit and to have the highest level of reserve capacity. So we are resistant to the stresses which uniformly or always occur with aging, so that a 60-year-old should want to enhance their cognitive, physical, psychological, and social reserves. The reserves being an idea coming from warfare, where you hold forces back to be used later. So you're going to have a battle, but you're not going to use them now, but you're going to have them ready to use later. So if we survive, let's say a 60-year-old person should consider the fact that when they're 80, they may fall and break their hip. That happens very often. A lot of 80-year-old people who fall and break their hip get pneumonia and they die. What determines the ones who survive and the ones who die is not only the kind of bacteria they get or how bad their pneumonia is, but how good their respiratory function was beforehand, how good their heart was, and if they were inactive, cognitively and physically inactive, they'd be more likely to die from that at the later age. So that these things are all related to each other. And the bottom line is there's some things we can do. A particularly important component of the physical reserve is the microbiota, because we have 1 kilogram or more of living bacteria inside us, our largest environmental exposure. So touching tobacco might have an exposure to tobacco mosaic virus, but that would be rather transient and small in volume. But we're exposed to these bacteria all the time, ever since shortly after birth. And all of our ancestors have had it.
I wanted to ask you on the book, on the cover of your book, there you have, I think, 4 leaves. And I asked myself, what sort of leaves you have on the cover? Could this be tobacco leaves, or are they simply green leaves?
Right, I don't...
No, because in case it's tobacco, it could be a suggestive picture. Look, honestly, I've never seen a tobacco leaf, although I love smoking tobacco and I can distinguish between a Virginia and a Burley tobacco. But I Googled the pictures and I said, it looks like, they look like tobacco leaves. Because also at a certain extent, the tobacco mosaic virus might have to deal with something called cell death and the programmed cell death. And I have no idea if aging is at a certain extent related not to smoking, which is making aging quicker, but at least to extend the life, in case the tobacco mosaic virus may alter the programmed cell death.
I don't have any experience with that, with those. I think the aging process is influenced by what we do. So it actually doesn't happen to everyone. This is the first concept of the book, is aging is not inevitable, and declines with aging are also not inevitable. Everyone is one day older than they were yesterday, but we're not all one day older tomorrow than we are today, because some people don't survive from one day to the next, and we don't know. So that because it's not inevitable, it's an opportunity. But it matters what we do. So it's possible a 60-year-old who smokes and drinks too much and is overweight and doesn't exercise, if they do the right thing, when they're 70, they could be in better health than they were when they're 60. So the declines with aging don't happen with everyone. And the 4 multiple reserves is a way to contextualize what is involved. It's cerebral things, systemic things, and psychological and social things, social networks, and avoidance of depression, and having a positive outlook is helpful.
And also the necessity of regular sleep. Am I right?
Certainly, yes.
It's funny. Also interviewed Professor Amos Karchin, and he said exactly the same things about the necessity of sleep. So I hope nobody will feel asleep now during our interview. Sure not. But I think it's very important that you actually sharpening the awareness of the public with basic things which everybody could use, could handle, on how to control aging. Am I right? Is that something which you'd like to communicate with your book?
Yes. I want to be clear I am an enemy of the idea that when you're going to go, you're going to go. That's a rather crude concept I've heard from my patients. Why do you ride a motorcycle without a helmet? Well, when you're going to go, you're going to go. I'm not afraid of dying. This is a very dangerous position, and it's a form of denial of personal responsibility. So there are things, and this is a problem both in educated and highly educated and uneducated people. They think that fate has something in store for them, and they can't change it. And I like to ask them, when they tell me this, you look both ways when you cross the street? Or do you figure, well, I'm not afraid of dying, so I might as well cross when I want to. I don't need to look. So it matters. So that I recommend a low saturated fat, high fiber diet, which means very little meat. And fruit and vegetables are high in fiber, beans and brown rice. There's no need to eat white bread, ever. And physical and cognitive activity is good for the brain. It's also good for the heart, of course. And television viewing is associated with a higher risk of Alzheimer's disease. Not implying that television causes the disease, but it's a marker of an intellectually inactive lifestyle. And opportunities for learning should be enhanced. I was on sabbatical for 1 year in Japan, and because I'm over 65, I had a card that let me use public transportation for free, which makes a lot of sense as a public health measure, because people who are more active will have lower health costs. They won't get sick as often as people who are home and not going out and not going to the zoo or go to the baseball game, even in Japan, or in other things to do.
But in addition to aging, which is something all of us are facing, particularly nowadays in the context, and this is my last question, if I may say, nowadays are also worried of long COVID. And Parkinsonism is one of the possible outcomes of long COVID or of COVID. So in case Parkinson is an autoimmune disease, and please correct me if I'm mistaken, then, and there might be some antibodies which protect smokers against Parkinson at a certain extent, then we could say that, well, these antibodies may protect one also against symptoms of long COVID. Or is the association which I'm making completely wrong?
Yes, that could be. Although I'm not.
Needs to be further investigated.
Certainly.
Yeah. Professor Friedland, thank you very much for joining us here on Quotidiano TV in Compass today. Thank you for explaining once more what determined you to write this fabulous article, which I highly recommend to everybody. Why, particularly to physicians, to get in touch with this very interesting subject, and also to make sure that we get a better understanding about disease, about opportunities, and particularly about aging and unaging.
Thank you very much.
It was my pleasure. Greetings to Louisville. All the best. Bye-bye, Professor.
Bye-bye.
Was this okay for you?
Very good.
Thank you very much. It will be
what
translated with Romanian subtitles within the next 2 weeks, and then I will send you the link.
Very good. Thank you. What should I call you? What is your first name?
Radu. R-A-D-U. Radu.
And my mother was born in 1910. And she went to Romania for the Ana Aslan program, along with her sister. My mother lived to be 83, and my aunt was 97. And I couldn't convince them not to do it, because what would I know? I'm only I'm just a son. And she died with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and but that was not diagnosed till she was 83 years old, and I wondered if that could be a complication of the therapy.
Was Ana Aslan administering lidocaine or something like that?
Yes, some procaine.
Yeah.
Is there still a gerontology institute in Bucharest?
Yes, and a good friend of mine, he is 72 and he's living in Bucharest and is going every year for 4 weeks to the Ana Aslan Institute. But
I'm not aware of any scientific reason why it should be effective.
I think it's a fashion. She was very famous during communism, and particularly the older generation is inclined to think that whoever was famous during communism must have been very performant, but that was maybe not the case.
Have you heard of a psychiatrist named Jablensky?
No.
Very good. He was a communist in Romania, and
Jablensky?
Jablensky.
I only know Professor Popa from the Romanian Academy of Science. He is the head of the neurology department, Constantin Popa.
Right.
He is 83 and still working.
Very good. Well,
I will send you these papers related to the inhibition of the prion proliferation into the central nervous system, written by the Korean scientists. And also these two Chinese papers, one with the presence of the tobacco mosaic virus in the lungs of COVID patients, and the other one with the stress in the endoplasmatic reticulum in HeLa cells, which they were looking at, and with this interrupted process of autophagy, which is then used on its membranes, used by the picoronaviruses and SARS viruses as a medium for facilitating these viruses a faster growth. And that's a paper from the Wuhan Institute from 2012.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Nice to meet you, Radu.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. May I say Robert?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a nice day. Thank you.